Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. I am Candace Savin. I am one of the members of the steering committee of the Westport Prize for Literature, and I am extremely pleased to be here this evening to present our third annual prize, which celebrates outstanding original works of literary fiction that are both relevant and timeless. And this prize was originally conceived as a juried book award that has broad-based community participation, which is perfect for Westport, a community of voracious readers filled with avid fans of literary fiction and thoughtful takes on contemporary life. This year, we again had a wonderful response to our call for readers from the community, and about 40 people participated by reading and reviewing the submissions. Too many to call out individually, but a huge collective thank you to each and every one of our community readers. And if anyone here would like to become a community reader next year, please let us know. We'd love to have you. I'd also like to thank the members of our jury, all of whom are fellow Westporters, book blogger and aggregator Suzanne Leopold, publishing industry veteran Erica Melnichuk, nonfiction writer and former Book of the Month Club Nina Sankovic, Book of the Month Club judge, excuse me. Authors Charlotte Rogan and Tommy Greenwald. And finally, a big thanks to my fellow steering committee members, Allison Hoffman, Maggie Mudd, Galia Gishan, and Patra Kanchanagam, and to the library staff who have worked with us to make this idea a reality. The award and its $10,000 prize is meant to support great literature and reflect and sustain the rich literary life of Westport. So before turning to this year's winner, I would like to offer a special thank you to Meghan O'Rourke, an award-winning writer, poet, and editor, and a champion of great literature, who has generously agreed to join us this evening in conversation with our prize winner. Meghan is the author of several acclaimed books, including The Long Goodbye and The Invisible Kingdom, Reimagining Chronic Illness, which was a New York Times bestseller and a finalist for the National Book Award. Meghan has served as poetry editor at the Paris Review and culture editor at Slate, and is currently editor of the Yale Review. So, our prize winner this year is The Edge of Water by Olufunke Grace Bankole. The book is a multi-generational immigrant saga set in Nigeria and New Orleans, exploring themes of migration and identity, spirituality and culture, survival and transformation. The book has received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and Forward Reviews, and Goodreads included it as a hottest debut novel of 2025. In addition, Kirkus Reviews calls The Edge of Water a global multi-generational novel suffused with heart, feeling, devastation, and hope, and PEN America said it is a provocative story of mothers, daughters, and adopted family on both sides of the Atlantic. In addition to her accomplishments in fiction writing, Ms. Bankole is a graduate of Harvard Law School and is the recipient of the Soro Justice Advocacy Fellowship. She'll be signing books afterwards, and without further ado, please welcome Olufunke Grace Bankole to the stage, along with Meghan O'Rourke.
Oh, they've given us the bright spotlights. Good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm Meghan O'Rourke. I'm so thrilled to be here with you tonight talking about your truly extraordinary book that I have not stopped thinking about since I read it.
Thank you.
We could be here for hours. We won't be. We won't be, I promise, but we could be. And it's a special pleasure to be here in the Westport Library, where I am writing my own new book in secret hours, stolen away from my children and other obligations downstairs in the room looking at the river. So this is a very special place for readers and writers alike. So thanks for having us. Okay, I'm hoping we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to take your questions, and I'm hoping we might get to hear you read just a little bit later.
Okay.
But I want to start with a question, which is that this novel feels at once so intimate and so epic. It's so closely observed in its portrayal of these 3 generations of women and men, several generations of men, 2 continents, a spiritual frame, a kind of diasporic frame. And in fact, in ways, it's a kind of historical novel too, unearthing and looking at a very tragic and horrific part of American history, the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. There's so much in it. I really wanted to know, where, as a writer, did this begin for you? Did it begin with a voice of a character? Did it begin with Katrina and the story of Amina? Where did it start?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love that question. And thank you so much, Meghan, for being here with me. It's an honor. And thank you to the Westport Library, to the Westport Prize. Thank you to all of you who were early readers. Thank you to the judges. It's an honor to be here. I grew up in libraries, and so winning a prize like this feels quite full circle for me. I love that question because I think I had just graduated law school with every intention of doing public interest work. I had a fellowship that was to take me to New Orleans to work with families of incarcerated children. So 3 days after law school, I end up in New Orleans. And I was working in New Orleans. I loved my work. And there was that lingering feeling that I wanted to tell stories, but I'm a child of immigrants, so the idea is you're not gonna make money writing books, telling stories.
Why do people think that?
Right? But here I am, right, winning a prize. So I was doing that work in New Orleans. I loved it. And I did have that moment, you know, in the middle of the night where you just sort of have that moment of having to come to the truth for yourself. I knew I loved social justice work, but I knew that also I most enjoyed meeting the families I worked with, hearing their stories, telling their stories. And so I did have one of those moments where I said, okay, I know I don't want to be a lawyer, and I'm going to try to find a way to start transitioning out of law. I left the city of New Orleans, moved to Florida for a guy I was dating. And 2 months later, Hurricane Katrina struck the city of New Orleans. And it was that sort of looking back. I had just lived in this city. I love this city. And I thought about my days off from work when I would walk to the French market and I would stroll around and I would meet these women. And there's a joke with Nigerians that you sort of recognize each other in the wild when you meet another Nigerian, right? So I would be at the French market. I would meet these young women that I knew were from Nigeria. So I'm in Florida. Katrina has struck, and along with the rest of the world, I'm watching the horrors, the aftermath, the flooding. And of course, I'm thinking about the places I'd lived. I'm thinking about the women I'd met. What happened to them? Where would they go, right? And not just who are they in the city, but who had they been prior to coming to the city of New Orleans. And so that was the genesis for me, right? And then I wrote a short story, and that short story, almost 20 years later, is the story that it's based on.
So wait, I want to unpack this for a sec. So you wrote the story kind of in real time. In real time, you were watching and you had this kind of emotional, affective reaction to, I know this place, I know these people. And was part of that, I know things that aren't showing up on television?
Such a great question. I'm getting chills right now because no one's asked me that, but there was that sense of urgency. That sense of, I know that place. I try to get in touch with friends. The lines were dead. To this day, there are people that I have not I don't know what happened to them. I couldn't get in touch with them. So there was this sense of it's happening in real time. I just left that place. And also my own feelings of what would have happened if I was still there, because I didn't have a car. I didn't know many people in this city. I'm one of those people who would have felt that I was troubling my coworkers by asking for help.
Yeah.
So very likely I would have been in the Superdome, because it was sort of where most people ended up. But I love that question, because I think I haven't really thought about that urgency in a while, so thank you.
Yeah. Well, two things. Okay, so one of the things that's so extraordinary about the book, and that I, as a fellow writer, want to congratulate you on, is that as someone who teaches writing, I often see that it can be very difficult for people who have a kind of real life experience of something, who've been trained in another discipline, let's say trained in law, to take that real world experience and kind of metabolize it into fiction. And in fact, one of the things that's really extraordinary about this book is that we don't feel the book is, in essence, primarily a lesson for us. We feel the book is, in essence, a work of art, a work of kind of aesthetic persuasion, a work of world building. I tried to read the book with very little information about it, just so I could have that reader. And it took me a while to realize, we're going to end up at Katrina. That was not part of where the book's world starts. So it's a very unusual and extraordinary thing to be able to start, in fact, in Nigeria, in the childhood of Esther, a generation, kind of decades before Katrina, build that world so vividly and slowly but persuasively take us to New Orleans in the early 2000s in America. So I wanted to pull back from Katrina, because we kind of end up there, and think about the book's very beginning, which starts with cosmology, starts with weaving Yoruba cosmology with a narrative grounded in realism. It starts with this quote, you define the word, and I might mispronounce it, imole, is that how you say it? Yeah, which is the word for light. Why is that where we start?
That's such a great question. So
You're nice to me, but yes.
I know Meghan has all the fantastic questions. I love it. That's interesting, because that was the original title of the book, Imole, which means light in Yoruba. And it's, anyone who's in publishing knows that you have ideas about your title, and then your publisher has other ideas about your title. Yeah. I think Imole, when you asked the question about that image or that character voice, Imole felt like an image of a place where in Yoruba cosmology, lives are being born and reborn. And so there's that cycle of coming and going with souls. And Imole felt like the place where they would come together. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I envision, that was a starting point, is this family of souls who had known each other throughout time, coming together in this time around the storm. Yeah. And sort of what were their lives in these different places. And I wanted, because I think Yoruba culture is so layered. There are Yoruba Christians who also practice the traditional religion of Ifa. There are English speakers who speak Yoruba. There are ways that the old and the new merge, the world above, the world below. Yeah. And I wanted to weave all those things into a book that I think really sort of respected the layeredness of the culture. And so it felt like all those elements had to come out. Yeah.
And it's also a book about these three women, right? Esther, her daughter Amina, is that, am I saying that?
Yes.
Right? And Layla, or Lila.
Yes, Layla.
Oh,
yes.
I love her name. And Esther spends her life in Nigeria. Amina emigrates to America, and Layla is born in America and makes her way back to Nigeria. So there's this kind of beautiful circle. And there is this theme through the book of this idea that you just talked about kind of souls being born and reborn, and this idea of what is destiny, what is accident, I don't know, there's something quite beautiful about these questions you raise of like, how does a very small action have very huge consequences?
Yes.
And how maybe that thing which feels so terrifying is kind of almost okay. Maybe that's the very essence of humanity, is to be containers in time. And I wondered if you could just talk about, I have, the men too are very vivid. Joseph, I feel very tenderly toward your character, Joseph.
Yes, I love Joseph.
But tell us a little bit about these characters, because you took these concepts and you turned them into people. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Joseph too. Joseph was my favorite character.
He's my favorite character.
Right, okay. I love that we
I
connect
was
on
like,
that.
I want to know him. He's so kind and thoughtful.
It felt really real to me.
He felt
And
very
what I
real.
love about Joseph is that it's, especially I think in our current times, you do not have to be a perfect person, a perfect immigrant to deserve your humanity.
Yeah.
And for me, writing Joseph felt
Right.
like a way to really sort of connect with that, his humanity. The way that I arrived at the characters, it was really interesting. In the research of the book, I wanted to write about that traditional religion, but in Yoruba traditional religion of Ifa, it's usually the men that are sort of held up and centered as the answer givers, right? And they are called babalawo. And so when I was researching, I was looking for the female counterpart, and I couldn't find any.
Yeah.
I know they exist, right?
Yeah.
But I could
Yeah.
not. Anytime I would sort of reach out, the men would always respond. The men would respond and say, you can interview me. So I ended up
so interesting.
I couldn't. And so what I did was I took the answers that I had from the male, Babalawo, and then I gave that character to a woman, because this is a book about women and the stories of women. And this Iyanifa, although she is a priestess and she is able to be in the world, the other world, she is also someone living among these characters as a woman. And so she is sort of the unifying narrator, who I felt could tell her story, tell the stories of every world, and tell the stories of all the characters. And one of the things I wanted to do was to make the focus of the storytelling, I wanted all the women in the book to be able to tell their own stories. And I wanted to have, because it is, Yoruba culture is typically, it's meant to be a matriarchal culture, but in practice, there is a great weight of patriarchy. And so I wanted the men in the book to sort of have their stories told through the Iyanifa and through sort of the lens of the women.
I thought it was such a brilliant structural device, because it allowed you to do so much with so much subtlety. Which is to say that I imagine part of what you were thinking about as you were writing was kind of decentering certain kind of often centered stories about diaspora or migration. One of the things you do quite powerfully and beautifully that's very hard to do is to kind of reimagine stories of gendered harm. There's experiences that certainly Esther and Amina have of harm that feel totally particularized to their life, right? It almost arrives as a shock when these things happen to them. And I think it's because of the Iyanifa and this way in which you've taken us out of the local lenses of our moment and put it into a kind of historical context of some of these stories repeat and repeat with different iterations, right? And so I wanted to go back to the destiny and then Katrina for a sec, because a really interesting kind of tension in the book and a kind of complexity of it that I loved was that there's a sense, on the one hand, that this is inevitable, that they're going to end up there. And there's a sense of this is a historically specific American tragedy.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? It's really interesting to have put those things up against one another.
I could be here all day. I love the way you frame your questions. I think that when I thought about going back to the title, The Edge of Water, and this concept of water and the movement of water, and the way water has such significance in Yoruba culture, and I wanted to make the connection between Nigeria, the land, and the land in the US, in New Orleans, and to have that sort of like the movement. And there is that tension, right, in the belief system of, did Amina end up in the storm because she sort of went against the oracle?
Right.
And it's destined that if you go against the oracle and the place you're born, these are the things that can happen to you. And in fact, this is a natural disaster. And the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina was in large part due to a lack of adequate government response. Right. And what I wanted to try to give voice to is the way that different people imagine their lives at different points. Based on where you are raised, what you believe, and how those things, and that happens for all of us, whether it's religion, whether it's spirituality or science. There is always tension in what we believe and why we think things are happening to us or in our lives. And I wanted to try to get at that.
Yeah, which I thought you did just so beautifully. And we're shaped, obviously, by these forces that you're describing of culture, religion, science. We're also shaped by time.
Yes.
Right? And I thought that was one of the things that happened in the generations, was that we see how we're all susceptible to the habits of thinking of our moment. But there's so much particular beautiful writing in this book. The beauty is never a kind of gilding on the horror that also is there. It exists side by side. I wonder two things, if you would read a little bit for us, and then I want to hear about who you were thinking of, like who are the writers in your pantheon, but maybe we could hear from you first.
Yes, I'm happy to read. And I think I'll read from the first chapter. Actually, this is the first Amina chapter. The book opens with Esther, the mother, starting the book, and then we go into Amina. So I'll just do a little bit of that. Okay. So at this point, Amina is reflecting back on her childhood in Nigeria, and the reader knows immediately that she is in the Superdome, and she is sort of reflecting back. Amina, shells in the shape of sky. It is true that in the end, we cannot tell the mind where to go. The storm gusts into the dome where I wait, the past riding on its winds. Although it is my mother I have loved most, memory retrieves my father first. Before I was born, my father, Sani, was an executive at a steel company. Then he lost his job and became a cloth seller. Of the 18 people who sold fancy patterned and skillfully woven cloth at Harvest Market, he was the only man, and this, like the limp in his right leg, the aftermath of a polio infection when he was a boy, embarrassed him. When the market's river began to dry, the scraggly children, the ones with the snot-stained shirts, food-driven bellies, and no proper home rearing to speak of, were the first to disappear. They vanished much the way a street corner is found closed one morning, nailed plywood, and blank signs where lights and words used to be. Life in the river city had begun to dim. After 2 rainless weeks in the wet season, trips to Harvest Market became a scattered once-in-a-while sort of thing, even for those for whom it had been a way of life. Imported cloth for naming ceremonies and societal weddings was now a seldom luxury. Sani, in his frustration, went days not speaking to my mother and me. In our passing, he hissed under his breath about this person or that one who bought cloth but hadn't paid him on time. One night at dinner, my mother pushed her questions to him. You think you're the first man to sell women's clothes to feed his family? The first man whose business struggled in a drought? I looked at my father. Did he think this? She looked at him up and down, peeling him with each round. He said nothing. When Sonny kicked my mother, she wobbled like a calf in its first step. A boxer dizzied by an unscripted blow, she grabbed at anything near to steady her body. The metal chair next to the kitchen sink and the cupboard handles became like ropes. And in all of this, even with the sparks flashing about her eyes, she stopped to do the numb tongue over sore gums. Am I really bleeding? Bit. She licked the tip of her forefinger. The taste of blood, like the shock of a first beating, is distinct this way. I have never forgotten.
So wonderful. Thank you. I want to pivot. Well, actually, no, I asked you another question, which I should ask, which is your pantheon of writers. Was there a tradition, or were there specific writers you felt you were writing into and toward, or was it really your source material that was kind of what you were being most faithful to?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for me because speaking of libraries, I didn't grow up in a house with many books. I remember a handful of books in my house. Ben Okri, The Famished Road, because he's a Nigerian author, and I think my mom is really proud of that. But as a kid, I was that kid who did lock myself in my room. And I remember my first sort of consciousness around reading was Ramona Quimby, age 8.
Such a classic.
Beverly Cleary, and it turns out Beverly Cleary's from Portland, Oregon, where I live now, so that's really cool.
Oh my God.
So Ramona Quimby, age 8, and I remember the first magical experience I had with writing was Tuck Everlasting,
another great
A Wrinkle
one.
in Time, all
my
those.
favorites, yes.
A Wrinkle in Time, and I remember Tuck Everlasting was that first taste of magic with what literature can be and do. And then, of course, child of an immigrant, I go to law school. And, and law school is very, it's mechanical writing, and it's very sort of, more structured. But I think I've always read.
Yeah.
And something happened, I think, in the maybe early 2000s, it felt like there was a sort of renaissance of Nigerian writers writing different kind of literature. It wasn't just immediately post-colonial.
Right.
It was, Nigerians writing about different cities in the US, the Chris Abani. I had read Sitsi Dungaremba, Nervous Conditions, which was earlier, which had been earlier. And then I think what really sort of sparked that energy of excitement was a Zimbabwean writer, Yvonne Vera. And Yvonne Vera was, this very scholarly, beautiful writer, and I think she had just a handful of books before she died at a really young age. But Yvonne Vera experimented with language, and that sort of really intimate language, beautiful language to talk about things that are challenging and hard. And this idea that writing can be intimate and attempt to be beautiful and still touch larger issues. Yes. And I think Yvonne Vera sort of is a North Star for me in always challenging myself. And the possibility of language, so I get excited.
Oh, I love that. I haven't read her work. I
think you'd like Butterfly Burning.
Butterfly Burning. Okay, it's now going on my. But the critic in me too is like, oh, I totally see the lineage from Tuck Everlasting and A Wrinkle in Time to this book. In all seriousness, because both of those books, and maybe there is a way in which your book, one of its geniuses is to bring kind of childhood perspective into adulthood. So we start with kind of, we meet Amina when she's so small, and Layla too, but there's a way in which the world is magical and very real all at the same time. That did make me think a bit of, I just happened to reread Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, which is also like deeply lyric and lush, but not in a way that's like, decorative, right? It's like the lushness is part of the act of seeing the world for what it is. So, so much of the book's emotional gravity comes from what mothers and daughters cannot say to one another.
Yes.
Until it's too late. What drew you to make silence in a book where people are talking all the time? and kind of the unsent letter, which is another key part of the book. Not conflict, right? It's sort of what the conflict that doesn't happen is the central force between them.
Yes, it was interesting because at different points of writing different parts of the book, I was also a different person. So there were parts of the book that
This is one of the real challenges of writing books, by the way. No, it's underrated, but that you change because it takes so long. Sorry.
That's right.
It's really hard.
No, it's true. When it takes so long that you are not the person when you started.
Hard. Yeah.
And so there were parts of the book that I had written years earlier, like that first short story, before I became a mother.
Yeah.
And then there was a way I could write, and I've always been a daughter, so I could really write from the perspective of Amina as a daughter. And then when I became a mother, there were layers that I felt I could put into the character of Esther that I just had not experienced.
Yeah.
And I think this idea of there is so much that is unsaid between mothers and daughters, and sometimes it's out of pain.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's out of the desire to protect without saying what it is you're protecting your child from. And I thought it was, when Esther starts out saying that, Nigerian mothers can't be the only ones who do this.
Yeah.
I think it was my own question of, is this a universal, this silence, is it a universal thing between mothers and daughters? Because I know what I have experienced in my own relationship with my mother, and I think also exploring my own fears about asking.
Yeah.
So there are things, and to this day, I don't know if my mother's read my book. My mother recommends my book to everyone. My mother,
no clue about whether
we have not had the conversation. I haven't asked, right? I haven't asked, have you read my
You're
book?
living out your book. Yeah.
Right? And so that kind of silence. So I interrogate myself, why haven't I asked my mother, who's proud of my book and shares it with friends, and why have I not asked my mother if she's read my book? Right?
I'm not going to be your analyst, but I will say,
Please.
I will say, I wonder if you're preserving a space for future books.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, tell me more.
I wonder.
So good.
And I also think that there's many reasons to become a writer, but the thing in life that I think is the undergirding reason people become writers is that there was something in their childhood that needed to be spoken that was not spoken.
Yes.
And this drives you to do this really insane thing of sitting alone on a beauuful day,
You're right.
So there's a lot there. We can go to the wine bar and talk. But I have some of these questions. I will just tell you, when I sent my father my book about my mother, which I did a wonderful event from here, he called and he said, "Would you like me to tell you where the typos are?" Which I thought was a very canny way of taking the power back if you've been turned into a character. So, so I want to ask two more questions, I think, at least, and then we'll open to audience. But one thing is about sort of the word trauma. There's a lot in the discourse right now about the idea of the trauma plot, about being in an era of writing when some writers are writing through an identitarian lens, which is one of the things I think you complicate in this book. This novel has a striking restraint around harm or trauma. Some moments arrive really quite obliquely, or through your depiction of aftermath, in fact. How do you understand the relationship between inherited trauma and self-determination in this story? Are these characters bound by the past? Are they resisting it? And how did you decide what to depict directly and what to let the reader intuit? Because I felt very trusted as a reader, which was something I enjoyed. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, there's that conversation too, that going into a book, should we start putting trigger warnings or even that statement at the beginning of books? I think my thought is that in living, particularly these women in this culture, in this time, there are traumas that these women experience, primarily with the men in their lives. But I didn't want to sensationalize it.
Yeah.
And even in that scene at the beginning with Esther, I wanted to focus on everything around it. What happens, like you said, in the aftermath? How do the people in her life respond to the things that have happened to her? How do they characterize it? Is she given room to talk about it? What are the limitations of that? And so I think that was important in also giving the women in the book the opportunity through living to move outside of the constraints that are imposed upon them and to find their way in different ways, but it's not, those questions are not fully resolved and they're not neat.
Totally.
Right? Because Esther, at different points, I think it can be argued that she imposes on her daughters
Yes.
the same sort of cultural constraints that were imposed on her.
Right.
Even though Esther would probably not characterize herself as someone who does that.
Yeah.
And so there is a way that
Yeah.
gets reproduced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things that's really powerful about the book, there's a couple of things I really appreciated where you held back from what could have been a very satisfying or tidy narrative development. I don't want to give too much away, but Esther's daughter, Amina, comes to America, and Esther has always wanted to kind of use her intelligence and to have access to college or other possibilities. And there's this buildup to the sense that maybe that will happen for Amina. Instead, we follow Amina as she becomes a mother. And that's some of my favorite writing in the book is her with Layla as a baby. It's incredibly tender. And then it's really Layla. It really takes 2 generations for some of these dreams to be kind of realized.
Yeah.
Part of there's an incredible heat in the writing around the days in the Superdome.
Yes.
And there's a kind of feverishness. And we both see Amina and we see Joseph, who is the one who could have been for Esther, who represents the path not lived. And tell me a little bit about those sections. I found myself wondering, were they written in real time? Were they written first? Were they written, because they carry a real charge and they, again, have a lot of restraint. Like there's stuff you just don't tell us.
Yes.
That you keep thinking, oh, I'm gonna find out this, and you don't, and that makes it all the more haunting.
Yes. So it was interesting for me about that, the Superdome, because the real life story of the Superdome is that so many people beyond the capacity of what the Superdome should have held ended up in the Superdome. I've seen numbers, 30,000. There's a range, 20,000 people. In the Superdome, there was, the power had gone out. People had been in there for days because there was flooding in the city. Food was running out. The plumbing had stopped working. Thousands and thousands of people. What I didn't want to do, I lived in New Orleans. I knew the people of New Orleans. I'd made friends. I didn't want it to be the story of an outsider imposing all of these things. Beyond the scope of the reality. So I wanted to respect sort of that general scope of the news stories I'd read. And I had spent time in the Superdome. So when I was writing those scenes, I imagined where Joseph would be in relationship to Amina, or the different levels, sort of like mezzanine area, because I'd been there. So I imagined myself back in there and what it would have been like to be in this one corner. You know, so just really taking myself back to, this is a city where I lived. And I don't know that I would have written about New Orleans or Katrina had I not been there, because it's been such a transformative part of the city's history and the people's history. And it feels very delicate. And I wanted to respect that as much as
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think one of the things you do is you really convey the partial knowledge one would have had in the moment, right? Like, so one of the challenges with any kind of historical writing is that we kind of use our knowledge afterward of what things are signifiers. I remember learning this early on, trying to write, for some reason I was writing all these poems about Theodore Roosevelt and other American presidents, and I remember writing this line about like him turning the like pigskin book, and then my writing professor was like, he wouldn't think like I'm turning the pigskin book. He would just be like, I'm opening the book, because, right? So one of the challenges is kind of the hindsight can be actually hard to reckon with. And I thought you capture the chaos, and you do show us that for Joseph, Katrina is a kind of BE and BC, you know, it's like there's before Katrina and after Katrina.
Yes.
We also get this hint that it changed and derailed his life.
Yes.
But he's also kind of pulled back.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So there's a really interesting way in this book in which you let huge things happen and have huge consequences, but then there's another turn in the road.
Right. Yeah.
That's not a question, just just praise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think too, and I was talking to someone earlier at the reception, that when these natural disasters happen, for those of us who are watching in the news, recently Jamaica, right? It feels like it's out there, but these are individual people making decisions like, where do I go?
Right.
Do I need to pick someone up? Who do I need to call? And I wanted to really think about the decisions you make in those hours when you hear that the storm is coming, and how do you make those decisions? And I think too, Joseph kind of represents that, that how we grapple with big things in our lives and how they become defining. So you start thinking, and I do this, I think before kids, after kids.
BK, AK, yeah, same.
Right? And so I think we tend to do that where, you know, before Katrina, after Katrina, and how that sort of solidifies in our minds these moments in our lives. Yeah.
These kinds of eras. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it, I think. My last question is, what is a question that you hope the reader will leave the novel thinking about?
Oh, that's so hard. Okay, let me flip that a little bit. I think one of the things I've been surprised about with readers is how readers take away from the book parts of the book that were not intentional.
Right, yeah.
Right, or, and I've started thinking about that question more recently about even whether to write with the hope of something being asked or being thought of. And one of the things that's been a challenge for me is that, you know, during debut year, you're doing events, you're talking about your book. The hardest thing is to sit back down and to write.
Oh, well.
Right?
It's a miracle if you are doing that, but yes.
So I'm
we
just
try.
at the point where I'm ready to write. And so I think going into this next book, giving myself a little bit more, thankfully I didn't read too many reviews of this book, so I don't feel that voice in my head of what to do, what not to do. But going into this next book, I think giving myself more room to just be creative again, because sometimes I think imagining too much, read the presence
of the reader.
Can limit maybe the story I'd want to tell, and trusting. I really appreciate you saying that, that you felt trusted as a reader, and I trust my readers. That gives, I have more confidence to trust my readers that they will take from it things that they bring with their own stories. You know?
Makes sense. Well, let's open it to questions from the audience. There's a place where you can ask questions.
Oh, that's
with a spotlight.
Cool. I know, I like that.
The first question is always the hardest, but once you break that ice, then it. Anybody?
Okay, I have a question for the group. Are there writers, aspiring writers in the group?
Writers?
Yes, okay. Oh, that's lovely. Welcome. Yeah, that's great.
I have a question. What part was the hardest to write? Because you have so many different characters. We talked a little bit about Joseph, who it sounds like kind of arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who was the hardest?
The
Or what was
hardest.
the hardest?
I think Esther's pain of the distance
Yeah,
from Amina,
yeah,
that feeling of regret about the things that have not been said.
yeah.
I think that was hard. That was
That is
hard.
hard.
Yeah.
I think we have a question.
Ooh, question. Yes.
I have a question about Fatima. Is it Fatima?
Yes.
Rashid. Because I thought they were such an interesting combination of well-intentioned and not, and how little small things can make such a huge impact. I was wondering, like, how you thought of them and where they came from, and how you just achieved like such a beautiful subtlety of people who were, they were sort of the bridge, between the past and the present. And so if they were real people or
Yes.
imagined
you.
people.
Yes, thank you for that question. So the question is about Fatima, the cousin for Amina. When Amina arrives in the city of New Orleans, her cousin Fatima and her husband Rashid pick her up from the airport, and that's sort of her integration into the city. One of the things that I'd always known, sort of subconsciously, because it was my own experience, but I hadn't really thought of, is that immigrants tend to move to cities where other immigrants from their country, their culture, are said to be doing well, right? So they hear back home, this city is welcoming, this place is a good place to go, there are jobs available. And so it made sense that Amina would sort of be welcomed into this place where her cousins were already doing well. And there's that tension too, where folks back home think that the folks in the US are doing better than they are, right? So Amina gets to see the complexity of, America might not solve all the issues or answer all the questions or give all the possibilities that I've been told. Yeah. So I was imagining sort of what that relationship would be like, and yeah.
Well, and I think it becomes such a powerful way of talking about how, a part I loved in the book is when Joseph goes back to Nigeria, and it is that truism, like, you can't go home again. He's with his family and friends, and someone says to him, well, can you get me a Rolex watch? And he's like, no, I can't. The guy's like, oof. And yeah, but there's something unbridgeable there between them. Yeah, we have another
Hi.
question.
I have just a reminiscence. I was in New Orleans maybe a couple years after Katrina, and we had a wonderful taxi driver, and we asked about his life, and he was an immigrant, and he said, we came because there was so much opportunity. Here people were fleeing New Orleans, and the immigrants were coming to fill. I was wondering, have you been back to New Orleans, and what's the energy of the city, or how do you feel about the city now versus then?
Yeah.
That is a wonderful, wonderful question. I have a little story about that. So when I lived in New Orleans, when I was sort of in that in-between of I want to become a writer, but I've trained as a lawyer, hard to leave, I started going to this bookstore, the Community Book Center, and I met this bookseller, Mama Jennifer. And the very first short story I wrote, I shared it with her. And, New Orleans fashion, she said, it's good, keep going. And I always thought about that encouragement from Mama Jennifer. So when I started book tour, New Orleans was going to be one of my stops. And I had a chance to go back to that bookstore almost 20 years later to Mama Jennifer and tell her, not only have I done these things with my writing, but I wrote that book about New Orleans. There is a section in there that's fictionalized the bookstore and Mama Jennifer, and to be able to give that to a city that gave so much to me was really special. And I felt that same feeling when I went back to New Orleans in February of this year. There are a few places for me where when you get off the plane, you feel at home. And there are people who say that New Orleans, there is no city in the US that is as African as the city of New Orleans. And in fact, many of the traditions, the foods are very similar. And even the intonation in some of the way New Orleanians talk sounds to me, to my Nigerian ears, like Yoruba, like the way you would speak Yoruba with an accent, right? And so being back in the city felt, again, like that returning, and then seeing Mama Jennifer at the bookstore and just being able to share the publication of the book with them. It was, beautiful, beautiful experience for me.
Oh,
Thank
what
you.
an extraordinary
Thanks for that
story. I think we're getting one more question. Yes.
All right.
Hi, thank you for sharing. So the theme of identity and displacement really shines through your book. And as a fellow Nigerian, Yoruba man, I wonder how you see how the definition or the concept of home has evolved for Nigerians in the diaspora, particularly across generations.
Yes. Oh, that's a beautiful question. And fellow Nigerian Yoruba man, thank you so much. When I was, and I think I shared this story earlier with someone in the reception and at dinner, that one of my fears and preoccupations before the book came out is how would it be received by Nigerians who, from my perception, were more authentically Nigerian, right? I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland. 3 weeks later, my parents took me to Nigeria, and I lived there till I was about 8. But one of the things that I found is that the language is the most critical bridge to the culture. And I'm grateful that my mom and my dad took me back at such a young age, because I think having the language has given me access to parts of the culture that I couldn't have otherwise, no matter how I look, how I dress, or what I believed. And so I've been really grateful for that. And I think too, having lived in different parts of the US, moving around a lot, I was joking with someone earlier that Nigerians are everywhere. And case in point, at Westport, right? So we're everywhere. And I love that. And I love that too. I think there is something about being a Nigerian, being a Yoruba. There are things that are distinctly ours that we can take anywhere in the world. And all of that being said, I see myself as someone who is continually moving between worlds, always. And I think that's why I wanted to write a book about characters navigating layers of worlds, because that's been my life and the lives of the people that I've known. Thank you for that.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. And I think we should give you a warm applause. And I just want to thank the Westport Library Prize, and the committee for making this wonderful night happen and for inviting me. And you will be signing books, so you must buy this book. You must get it signed. Give it to a friend if you already have it. Buy another one.
And a round of applause for Meghan's wonderful thing.